Hello and welcome. This is Wilrens for Create a Learning Site, the place to go deeper in your understanding of the Bible. Sarcasm is serious business. I'm not kidding. Wait, was that first statement, sarcasm is serious business, sarcastic? Or at least ironic? And the second one? No, not really. The first one's a paradox, an apparent contradiction. And the second one perhaps as well. I'm not kidding, but I am. So surely this is a bad example to start a discussion of sarcasm. Now that is irony. Oh my, this is complicated. How on earth can we tell these concepts apart? Matthew Pavlak has tried in his study of sarcasm in Paul's letters, published in 2023. It's a fascinating, even if excruciatingly exact study. As I said, sarcasm is serious business. So let's take a closer look at how it works. I will start by exploring two key concepts, irony and sarcasm, and then apply them to Paul's writing style. The original meaning of the Greek word for irony, ironeia, we're dealing with a Greek loanword really, is to hide something through deception or pretense. Both irony and sarcasm involve saying something different from what we truly mean. Often, irony is defined as meaning the very opposite of what is stated. And it can be commenting, "What a beautiful day," when it's raining, is the obvious example. By the way, this is what ChatGPT came up with, asking for an illustration of sarcasm. I guess artificial intelligence still has some way to go. So it can be the opposite, but it's not always that way. In this discussion of irony, Pavlak uses the example, "You are so clever," blurted out in response to someone who is annoyingly showing off his superior knowledge about things. Now here the words are technically true. The person is clever, knows a lot. The intended meaning is not the opposite of the factual statement. It's not, "You are stupid." However, as Pavlak points out, the statement does imply a negative evaluation of the other person's behavior. This evaluation is indeed the opposite of what sounds positive. "You are so clever" really means "you are so annoying." Sarcasm is a form of irony. It comes from the Greek word sarcasm, to tear flesh. Well, that tells us something. While irony is often neutral and humorous, sarcasm typically carries a sharper edge. It mocks, it ridicules, and sometimes it insults. Sarcasm is usually directed at people, while irony can refer to situations or events. Pavlak defines sarcasm as an expression where a positive statement implies a negative attitude. A great biblical example comes from the book of Job, who sarcastically tells his friends, "No doubt you are the people, and wisdom will die with you." Now, Job isn't praising his friends here. He is mocking their arrogance. In other words, so Pavlak, I argue that sarcasm normally functions as an implicit challenge to what the speaker perceives as a claim to some positive quality made by another party. That claim is ridiculed and undermined. How can we tell that something is sarcasm? Let's turn to 1 Kings 22 for an example. King Ahab of Israel is plotting to go to war against Syria, but he strongly desires King Jehoshaphat of Judah to join him in that fight. And to accomplish this, he has brought together 400 prophets, and they're all proclaiming the same message. "Go up, for the Lord will give it into the hand of the king." Jehoshaphat likely senses that something is amiss with the unanimity of the 400 prophets, which prompts him to request another opinion. The only option at hand appears to be the prophet Micaiah, who resides in prison. When he is brought in, Ahab asks, "Micaiah, shall we go to Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall we refrain?" And Micaiah answers, "Go up in triumph, the Lord will give it into the hands of the king." 1 Kings 22 verse 15. So on the face of it, he gives the same answer as the other prophets. But Ahab is annoyed. "How many times shall I make you swear that you speak to me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord?" How did he know? How did Ahab pick up that Micaiah was insincere in his answer? It must have been obvious. Most likely his body language and his tone of voice gave him away. Now, in written texts, recognizing sarcasm is more difficult, as we lack tone of voice and body language. But there are signs. For instance, negative evaluation. Sarcasm is often followed by an explicit denial. Hyperbole. Sarcasm often involves exaggeration. And incongruity. What is said does not fit the context of the situation. It obviously cannot be true. Now we come to Paul. One tool he uses in Romans to structure his text is questions such as Romans 6 verse 1, "What shall we say then? Are we to continue in sin that grace may abound? By no means." On the surface, Paul appears to give this question, and others like it, serious consideration. However, it fulfills all three criteria just listed. Paul quickly rejects this idea as absurd. The suggestion may well be an exaggeration, and the context of Romans makes it clear enough that Paul could not seriously have entertained such a course of action. We are dealing with sarcasm. Sarcasm and irony aren't just clever tricks, they are tools Paul used to challenge, rebuke, and encourage his readers in profound ways. Paul's use of sarcasm is especially noticeable in 1 Corinthians, although I do not find it easy to apply these labels or even to follow Pavlak as he applies them. It's clear enough in 1 Corinthians 4 verse 8, "Without us you have become kings." Denial immediately follows, and one can easily imagine Paul's caustic tone of voice. Likewise in 1 Corinthians 6 verse 15, "Shall I then take the members of Christ and make them members of a prostitute? Never." But what is sarcastic about 1 Corinthians 1 verse 27 and following? Based on the context, Pavlak argues that Paul considers the wise and the wisdom of the world to be not wise at all. He therefore places wise and wisdom in quotation marks. Something similar applies in 1 Corinthians 8 verse 1. "Knowledge puffs up," where even the ESV uses quotation marks to indicate that this is not real knowledge. Paul's sharpest and most biting rhetoric in all his writings appears in 2 Corinthians, especially in his vitriolic self-defense, which begins in chapter 10. That's well known, nothing new. But beware, there is sarcasm, but it is not as prevalent in 2 Corinthians as it is often made out to be. We need to be precise. Pavlak certainly is. In 2 Corinthians, Paul often uses self-deprecating irony, a form of irony where negative statements about oneself imply a positive evaluation. Now, that's the very opposite of sarcasm. Instead of a positive evaluation implying the negative, as in sarcasm, we get a negative evaluation implying a positive one. For example, when Paul says, chapter 10 verse 1b, "I who am humble when face to face with you, but bold toward you when I am away," or "I robbed other churches by accepting support from them in order to serve you." Well, Paul's using irony to express his frustration with the Corinthians' misguided perceptions. When Paul directly compares himself with the super apostles in 2 Corinthians 11, he effectively combines sarcasm toward the false apostles and the Corinthians with self-deprecation in relation to himself, of course. One could also say his whole take on boasting in these chapters is sarcastic. Paul is going to join in the boasting, but he considers it a fool's errand, and his boasting is, in a sense, sarcastic. He only reluctantly engages in it in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, starting in verse 21b down to 12 verse 10. This is the so-called fool's speech, also known by its German name, Narrenrede. And now comes the big surprise. According to Pavlak, this section, the fool's speech, quote, does not contain significant verbal irony or sarcasm. The boasting here is not ironic, but factual, including the implied positive evaluation of Paul's actions. Paul has done and experienced all of it, and it should count for something. Besides, in parts, something else is going on, necessitating yet another label. The speech includes the use of parody. Paul imitates something in a way that ridicules it. This way, he mocks the cultural expectations of what makes for heroic exploits. His are almost the opposite, being lowered in a basket in flight instead of scaling the city walls in attack. And yet, Paul also ridicules, or at least relativizes, the visionary genre of the journey to heaven, while at the same time bringing in his own experience. He refuses to make a big deal out of it, but he's not sarcastic. He has experienced this. Now, and there's plenty of paradox here as well. Weakness is strength, but sarcasm, this is not. As I said, I don't find it easy to apply these labels. What, for instance, should I do with Paul's repeated "do you not know" in 1 Corinthians? It certainly carries a sting, but is it sarcasm? Neither Pavlak nor others classify it as such. More important than getting the label right, however, is to analyze and be able to explain how a statement, in this case a question, "do you not know," is meant. It appears that Paul feigns surprise at the lack of knowledge, or the fact that he needs to inform or re-inform the Corinthians of certain things. But of course, he's not surprised at all. The force of the question is a statement. You ought to know, but you don't. In other words, you are not as wise and knowledgeable as you think you are. Sounds like sarcasm to me, but I may be wrong. What do I know? Wait, is that self-deprecation?
The show will be starting in just a few moments. Thank you for your patience. The show will be starting in just a few moments. Thank you for your patience.